The next most common reason for people to want to grow local provenance plants is to avoid ecological disruption. And I don't know how many people have actually seen ecological disruption that results from mixing up genes from local and non-local plants. So I thought I'd bring along an example. It's the example of Coria reflexa in the eastern half of Melbourne. It's a fairly common species still, but decreasingly so. Here is what I believe to be the local form from the eastern suburbs and out into the Dandenongs and beyond. It's a sparse shrub, tends to be scattered through the vegetation. It has green flowers. The plant that you see in the slide there is in full flower, and if you look closer you'll find some pale green flowers. So it's not the most spectacular of plants, but that I believe is the indigenous form of Coria reflexa that grows wild in eastern Melbourne. Now, there are much nicer forms of Coria reflexa. There are beautiful ones, and Liz has been covered with some lovely red flowers on her face there. And they're often rather more densely foliaged. They're attractive to the extent that I know in at least a couple of Indigenous nurseries, they don't sell what I regard as the Ridgy-Dig local form with the green flowers. They sell the red ones because they sell much better and they look so much more beautiful. But I don't believe they're the local form. Now, does that matter? People get nice plants to put in their garden. Councils will be able to put them in parks and people will enjoy them, and that sort of thing. But it has a cost, because if you mix up these multiple forms, as is happening even between people's gardens and wild populations, like in Wantirna, you end up sometimes, quite often I'm finding, with situations like this. That's Darren Wallace standing there. He'll be talking to us before long. And he and his team are about to rip out several hundred plants of Coria reflexa, some of which have green flowers, some of which have red, and they are all within a patch which used to have a handful of the green, sparsely scattered, spindly sort of shrubs. And underneath each of those has come up these fellas, and they've got the red flowers, the pink flowers, a whole range of different expressions of genes, but they are very densely foliaged and they aren't the sparse ones that occur naturally. I remember this area before that happened. It was covered with wildflowers. It was an open grassy ground flora with lots of orchids and things like that. We've lost those until Darren and his team, with council's approval, pulled these out. This is at the Bateman Street bush in Wantirna. So I brought this along because I thought it's a very good example of a number of things that might prompt people to stick with local provenance, unless there are special considerations, because sometimes just by getting a gene pool that might make something more vigorous, I mean these ones are really vigorous, they're displacing all the parent plants. So yes, you can get more vigour by bringing in genes from outside, but it comes at a cost. And so we ummed and erred about this between myself and council and Darren, who originally drew attention to the problem, and we decided they've got to go. Pretty though they might be, vigorous though they might be, we don't want that. So that's an example of why we might favour local provenance plants for Coria reflexa, except that with Coria reflexa so many people have them in their gardens that it's too late to do this. But you might want to stick with local provenance to avoid this potential thing. So I just brought that along as an example to start the discussion. And I wonder if somebody on the panel might want to comment about how commonly this occurs and what sort of importance people should place on it.
Well, I suppose this is a very interesting example, and it's not something that I've seen.
If you've got others, vox vote.
Yes.
Put it through the messages and through.
I think I would have said that I've had the opposite effect, where it's the small populations of Indigenous remnant vegetation that are struggling, and sometimes you can take them out of their natural environment and they will grow much more vigorously. But it's an ecological network, I suppose, and it depends on the effect it's having on other species. I think one of the things that Ari mentioned about animals in bringing in germplasm from other areas, in a lot of cases that can actually help conserve the variation in an Indigenous population that might actually be distinct, but is at risk of being lost if you just leave that population breeding within itself, because you run the risk of the effect of inbreeding depression. So, no, I haven't seen that. But I think in Western Australia, and maybe Maurizio might know more about this, the effect of planted and naturally occurring Camelorsium uncinnatum was an issue where people around, I think, Bold Park, south of Perth, were asked to remove their nursery-bought Camelorsiums because they were crossing...
That's waxflower for you who don't know the scientific names.
They were crossing with, with the native form at Bold Park, which was different. So I suppose we do have examples, but I haven't seen anything as spectacular as that.
Okay, I can mention that it's not just at that site in Wanturna. There's another number of other sites through Knox and Maroondah and Manningham and so on where the same thing is happening. Ari's ready.
Yeah. This is a cultivar, right? So this is really a cross between a native form and a cultivar, not so much between two different provenances.
Look, that you end up with such a swarm of different hybrids that some of them are even hybrids with Coria alba, which is a whole different species. Some of them are, these ones appear to be between Coria reflexa variety reflexa and Coria reflexa variety reflexa. Different forms within the same variety of the same species. But I didn't mention the concept of hybrid vigour. It's well established through horticulture that when you hybridise two species, you will often get what they call hybrid vigour. You wouldn't expect it would happen within a variety of a species. And I'm not a geneticist.
Sure.
You don't want to listen to me about genetics. That's why we've got these guys. But something funny is going on here, and it looks like hybrid vigour. And maybe there are some genes that have come from other species into a garden. Still looks like Coria reflexa, variety reflexa. The whole group is very hard to break up into different varieties and species, and it's pretty much the tart of the family, which is rather tarty more generally. If you look up Flora Victoria online, you'll find that it refers to Coria reflexa being particularly prone to hybridisation. So it might be just that we don't really know how to break up what we regard as a species into different things, and maybe they're behaving more like different species.
Hybridisation, of course, does occur in nature quite a lot as well. And you do get eucalypts, prime example of that. Grasses, another prime example. And hybrids can be quite vigorous, and of course that's part of the natural evolutionary process. So in some cases you expect to pick up hybridisation going on. And some people have argued that's as a consequence of the fact that we have such fragmented environments, we don't have enough hybridisation going on because we've effectively stopped gene flow. So I think you need to put a little bit of perspective in terms of saying hybridisation can occur naturally and does occur. And I guess from a provenance point of view, the interesting question is, if you put two provenances together, one distant and one close, do you get hybrid vigour? And that's certainly worth doing. And I think it's something that you'd monitor. In all of this distant provenancing that people are talking about, it's not the case that you simply take a population from far away, bring it locally, and then forget about monitoring it. You need to monitor things as they go along. And of course, what you want to do is make sure that you don't have adverse outcomes like this one clearly going on. And there are ways of doing that. It's again one of those situations where you have to build knowledge. But I think from a hybridisation point of view, it can occur naturally. It is going on all the time. You have to watch out for it. But as Liz said, it's not something that we see very commonly in nature.
Thank you.
Now, Erica, can you introduce yourself, please?
My name's Erica Peters, and I'm a member of the Knox Environment Society, and I work with council on gardens, well, not as council, as a volunteer, Gardens for Wildlife in Knox. My question is about the sweet pittosporum, whether that's a similar example, because that's certainly a weedy thing in Knox. Is it a seed scattered thing, or is it to do with the genetics?
My understanding of that is that the species has been moved out of its native habitat in Gippsland, and it has become a weed. So something coming out of its natural location has allowed it to become more weedy. Perhaps it's lacking in certain competition, but it does seem to be spread by birds, I think. So perhaps it's a combination of it having wider dispersal now, and also the disruption in areas where it becomes established. You know, there's disturbance that allows the seed to develop. I know it does also hybridise with Pittosporum bicolour in some areas, and so that's certainly not a hybrid event that would have occurred prior to European settlement and changes to habitats.
Can I just add something on that now? Irrespectively of the species Pittosporum corea, this need also to put into their, as Liz was just mentioning, into the context. So, and there's a range of contexts. So here, the normal disturbance pattern might have changed, and so opportunity might or might not have a reason for this particular hybrid, or maybe the opportunity went as good for the natural subspecies, species, whatever you want to call it. Same thing in situations such as Pittosporum. Conditions for species like that, and I do a lot of my research on rainforest species. For species like that, conditions are changing through time, and a lot of rainforest species are expanding naturally. Now, if, again, without putting Pittosporum into the context here or not, I don't know, but a lot of species are changing their natural distribution in a natural way. As you all know, there is no such thing as stable community and ecosystems. Things change through time as the environmental conditions change through time. So I was mentioning before changes in glacial cycles. So 15, 20,000 years ago, conditions were very, very different. Much cooler, much drier. Species were distributed and assembled in very different ways. And those changes are still occurring as conditions change. So we need to take all of that into context. And it's not denying that some species are weedy and problematic, that here, as Ari was mentioning, you might have cultivars coming in and their vigor, but we need to put things into context.
There's a whole bunch of species that people have been throwing at us about examples and species that's coming thick and fast. So we've got, concerns about Lemandra like longifolia and Lemandra hystrix, Leptospermum continale, and the difference in the Gippsland plain and southeastern Australian. You can see quite differences in that species. Grevillea rosemuller flora, as an example, with quite substantial differences between different species. Some hybridisation between Cutamondra wattle and silver wattle. So lots of species coming in. Acacia pycnantha, people are concerned about hybrid figure with Acacia pycnantha as well.
Okay, they're good. Some of them are better than others. I really like the Grevillea rosemarinefolia one because it's an indigenous species to the Melbourne area. There's the Hurstbridge form, I think, and they do hybridise with people's garden plants in a similar way to this. And they do have a weedy tendency sometimes when you get those things. So that's a very good parallel to this one, I'd say.